Right. Hello, everybody, and very welcome to this afternoon's talk about Eithinog, one of our nature reserves in Bangor. To start with, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Anna Williams. I work as the Education and Community Officer out of the Bangor office. And today, you can see in the picture, we've also got Matt. He's sitting over there. He works as the reserves officer for a lot of our nature reserves, including Eithinog. So I will start the talking about trees and other things, and then Matt will take over afterwards, talking more about the management. And you probably have hopefully lots of questions for Matt, which we could take at the end, or for myself. So the Wildlife Trust, we are a charity and we are a membership organisation. So for those of you who maybe don't know much about us, you can find out more on the website. And on the website, you can also see details about other talks and events. And normally we would lead a lot. The branches organises events, and there's lots of things happening all around North Wales. But obviously at the moment it's slightly limited due to COVID. But at least we've been able to carry on with the volunteering work parties. So the reserves are still being managed. And if you're interested to join, that's something you can find out on our website. If you want to become a member, there's also a lot of information on the website. Or if you want to sign up to one of our newsletters, our e-newsletter, it's all there. If you want to contact us individually afterwards, here are our emails. So yeah, any questions, or if you want to find out more, just send us a mail. Okay, so today we're going to do a kind of a virtual walk around the reserve. I haven't done this before. Normally I would do a real walk, and I did do one in December, and that was focusing on trees in winter. We had a couple of lovely walks done, so I hope I can try and give you a feel for what we were seeing then. So I don't know how much you know about Eithinog, but it's a grassland reserve, and it's also got a bit of woodland in it. And historically, it was part of a farm called Canal Farm. It was farmed traditionally for centuries, and it escaped the impacts of agricultural change. It was designated for housing in the 50s, but that stopped, nothing happened. And in the 90s, they started to want to implement this housing development at Eithinog. But then there was a lot of local protests about this, and people have been using the site for recreation for decades. They were starting to battle because they were very conscious of the value of this green space at the edge of Bangor. So there was 15 years of challenges, direct action, and then ecological surveys. And in 2008, most of the land was actually designated as a site of special scientific interest. And then it was acquired by the Wildlife Trust in 2012. So interestingly, there are a lot of rare and special fungi on the reserve. And I think they kind of saved the area from development, which we are all very grateful for. So the Wildlife Trust has managed this since 2012, as I mentioned. Here, it's a series of fields, and we are going to go for a walk through them. I'm not going to bore you too much with the names of the different fields, but this entrance is on Ffordd Eithinog, which is on the road as if you were driving up to Friar School or Ysgol Top. So let's get in. So that's the entrance. And when I was there, most of the photographs are from a lovely day, the 10th of February. And the first thing that greeted me was a song thrush with its beautiful song. So the moment you go in there, I think you'll be welcome with birdsong. So do listen out. The first tree immediately to the right of the gate is this thorny, spiky creature. And I'm sure you're all familiar with hawthorn or Freda Wyn in Welsh. Hawthorn is a very, very good tree for wildlife. The spiky thorns make it an excellent place for birds to make a nest in. And then it's later on in May, it's also called the May thorn. It has lovely white blossoms, which are great nectar and pollen for the bees and other pollinators. And then they turn into the horse, which I think we can see here. And the red berries, they last long into the winter. So they are very welcome food for birds, of course. The hawthorn, they are scattered throughout the site. They are very, very tough tree, and otherwise in the landscape, they are the ones that usually survive the toughest winds up in our uplands, in our mountains. So they are very tolerant of both wind and drought. And in pagan times, they were a symbol of fertility and had strong associations with May Day, as I mentioned. So hawthorns and blackthorns. Blackthorns, as Matt would probably tell you, it creates a lot of work for people who are managing the site. And if you have it yourself in your gardens, you probably know it suckers everywhere. So the blackthorn also forms fantastic hedges. And here you can see a wide hedge, excellent for nesting birds. And the blackthorn comes out, the blossom of the blackthorn comes out before the leaves come out. So very soon, or maybe already in some places, the white flowers are coming out on the bare branches. And it's a real lovely spectacle. And that is the main difference. So when you drive around in the countryside and you see the flowers now early on during this next month, you can be sure that they are blackthorn and not hawthorn. Hawthorn, the leaves come out first and then the blossom come after. There is a lovely story actually about hawthorn and the Welsh goddess, and as she walked across the sky, she was spreading the petals, the white petals of the hawthorns, and they formed the Milky Way. I forgot the name of her, but anyway, that's a good story. So as I'm walking in from the gate down to the right and along the woodland edge, and all along this edge, we have the fair bits of areas of bramble, as you can see here in the photograph. And we leave them, and I think if you're managing land yourselves, it's always good to leave areas for wildlife. Again, it's good for nesting. There's excellent nectar and food for butterflies, actually the berries. Very often later on in the year, you can see red admirals hanging on to the blackberries, enjoying the juices. And of course, being a place where lots of people go, we all go blackberrying there. So it's an excellent place for blackberry. And that also goes for the blackthorn, of course, because they got sloes there. So I certainly picked my sloes one year there to make into sloe gin to give to my friends for Christmas. So a good place to go and do a little bit of foraging. As we walk along the path, you see these 3 tall trees. Those are the wild cherry, the Prunus avium. And to recognize them, I'm going to go look a bit closer. This is the first characteristic that you're probably familiar with, the horizontal lenticels, which are forming all around the bark. So basically it looks stripy. And then the buds, they form in these tight clusters around the tips, which we will see in another tree as well later on. Quite pointy, shiny, and then along the stem, they grow alternatively along the stem. The crowns of wild cherry are usually quite messy. They sort of look like they haven't got really a neat pattern, unlike oaks. So anyway, this is our wild cherry, and here's some more wild cherry. So now you can probably get your eye in, look at the buds, cluster of buds at the edge, at the end of the tip of the branch, tip of the branch. So then we are walking along and we're seeing some lovely ash trees here. And the ash, these trees are going to go a bit closer. The ash, some of the ash trees have still got the seeds left from last year, and we call them keys, the ash keys. And they obviously provide food for birds. And some years, there's an awful lot of keys, like a mast year. And then you will see a lot of these seeds about. And with trees, maybe you don't think about it, but some trees are both male and female on the same tree, and some are separate trees. So it's called being a dioecious tree. And the female and male that are, with ash, they are separate, they are dioecious. You have male trees and you have female trees, but they got something unusual about them that you can have both on the same tree. So otherwise, if you see the keys, a lot of keys, you think that's a female tree. The flowers are small and purple, forming around the bud. I don't think I got a photo of that. Oh, here's a close-up of the seeds. And then here's a close-up of the bud. So these buds are very easily recognizable. A child actually, they told me, well, it looks a bit like a bishop's hat, the final bud at the tip there, and the buds are sitting opposite each other on the branch. So the ash tree is one of the trees to come that's last to get into leaf, and is also first to drop the leaves. And they drop the leaves usually when they're green. They're not a good tree for autumn color at all. And of course, we have got ash dieback, and there's some on the reserve, so we have to keep an eye out for that, sadly. Here are some more ash trees. And now we'll see a slightly more mature one. Looks like an old female mature ash with lots of seeds. Matt's laughing. Anyway, I think she's beautiful. And the mature trees, the tips, they go up. So on the branches, the tips of the branches, they bend upwards. So they're very elegant. And ash trees, the timber, been very, very useful for millennia. It's been coppiced, and the trees grow very straight timber. It's been used for spears, it's been used for oars, it's been used for building anything, handles, anything where you need strong wood that doesn't split easily. So ash is traditionally coppiced. It coppices well, and has been a very good timber tree. So from ash, we move to the oak, and many oaks, you probably see it, many of them keep their leaves through the winter. And actually, they don't drop them until the new green leaves are sprouting from the buds. So here's a lovely old oak tree, and we're going a bit closer to see the buds. And you probably see they are looking similar to another bud. And actually, before I move on to that, did you notice the name of the oak in Welsh, Starwan di Goes? So it's without legs. So this is a sessile oak, and the sessile oaks, you can separate them from the English oak by looking at the acorns. And if the acorns sit without a stalk, like you can see here, then it's sessile oak. Stalkless means it's sessile. And I'm glad to see that there's a couple of cups here left over from the acorns. So the acorns have no stalks, but the leaves have got stalks. And that's the other way around with English oak. Also the leaves, if you have the two trees together, the lobes are much deeper on a sessile oak than an English oak, although they do hybridize. So of course that throws a spanner in the work. But here we can see buds, they form like the cherry in a cluster at the tip of the branch, and then along the branch they are alternate. And here I got a very big close-up, and you can see the scales. It usually have about 5 or 6 scales along the length of the bud. Those are some of my favorite buds. They are absolutely epic, especially now. You see, if you watch them, if you have an oak tree and just keep looking at it, you see they're usually they're stubby to start with, and then now they're elongating until they finally burst open. And that goes for most buds. I was just noticing some beech buds today, and they're already going longer and slightly fatter. So as I was taking that photograph of the oak bud, suddenly this bird came flying over. It's really amazing. So buzzards come flying over, and it felt really close, and that's rather nice when you're in town. And these were my shots I managed to get before it disappeared. So we are walking along the path, and on the land to the right of us, which we don't own, there's a lot of old oaks. And we've been clearing some trees on our land, and then often what we do is this called dead hedging. Matt can tell you more about that. It's an excellent way, obviously, to both for us to tidy up, well, getting rid of the stuff we had to cut down, and then also making a habitat for wildlife. There are a number of fields, and you keep going through the kissing gates, and along the sides you might see these piles of brush, which are left there on purpose, again, as good shelter for wildlife. So here I was walking along and then started chatting to the lady here with the dog. It's very, very popular. People go there daily for their walks. We looked up in the tree because I could hear the blue tit singing, and this little blue tit was very busy, and it wasn't doing what I thought it might be doing, but have a little look. I got a film here, let's see. Yeah, be patient. So I thought it was brilliant. It was actually cleaning out the old nesting of materials. So I thought it might be going in, making a nest, but no, it was just time for a good old spring clean. And I suppose now it will have made its new nest. So you can see how valuable these holes are in our oak trees. And that's where a branch would have been, that's fallen off, and then the wood has rotted behind. And of course, those holes are also very good for bats, for roosting. We need to go to the next slide. So here she is, happy with this morning's work. As I mentioned, the grassland is very important, and we got a great variety of meadow flowers there. That we can talk about in another talk later on in the summer. And we also got the fungi that I mentioned in the beginning. Somebody needs to look after the grass, and we have a great gang of belted galloways there. And I will let Matt talk about how we manage it with the cattle on the reserve. That's been very successful. Obviously, having cattle on a reserve where there are lots of people, there could be potential for conflict. So you have to make sure that we get that right. And make sure that people are aware what they should or shouldn't do. So we go down into a little woodland bit, and from here you have a fantastic view over the Menai Straits and the Menai Suspension Bridge, which was completed in 1826, and you probably know it's a Thomas Telford design. And before that, all the cattle from Anglesey that needed to go down to London for the fairs and the trade markets, they had to swim across the straits. There was quite a lot of casualties and cattle lost. So they realized they did need a proper bridge. And this was the result, which is a very attractive and iconic bridge in our landscape. Down in the woods, we have understory of hazel, Cochlan in Cymraeg, and Corylus avellana in Latin. The hazel, you're probably noticing at the moment. Of course, the catkins are out, and those are the male catkins, again providing good food for birds. And the hazel has been copies traditionally, similar as to ash, over the millennia, and very useful tree for building houses for the lath and plaster. And it weaves nicely and it's like supple, so you can use it for a number of different construction projects. Of course, it's good shelter. When you coppice, you just cut it down and then you let it regrow from the stump, and then you end up with lots of multiple stems on the stool, it's called. And I thought every child knew that hazels had hazelnuts, but they don't any longer. Certainly when I was a kid, we went out picking hazelnuts because they're a great treat, lovely to eat. And also, of course, the birds like them, birds, squirrels, and small mammals. So another source of good food. And again, if you are gardening and you want to think of some small trees to plant, I would pop in a hazel. Hazel and hawthorns, they're great. It's a very good tree for conservation. The buds, let's go to them. They are sort of greeny brown, slightly roundish, alternate along the branches. And you can see here the male, the catkins, those are the male flowers. And interestingly, the tree, nature's very well organized. It can't self-pollinate. So the pollen from the male won't actually fertilize the female flowers here. Most of the photos are mine, this isn't, but at the moment you can go out and start looking for these female styles that are appearing at the end of the bud. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I do think this photo is really nice too. So that's the male and the female flowers on the same branch. Oh yeah, here I got some photos of the bud. As you know, it's very difficult to take the photo if you haven't got a distinct background. So I did it against my arm. Down at the bottom, we also have some silver birch, and I'm sure this is a tree we are all familiar with. This is one tree that most children also know. I find them quite elegant. It's a tall, elegant tree, and the branches are rather thinner and more, delicate than both the ash and the oak that I talked about before. So here you can see, let's see, I managed to zoom in a little bit better. And on the birch tree, both the male and the female flowers are catkins. The male are the longer ones, and the females are greener, shorter, but usually come out later. So birches are great food, again, for birds. And I did see quite a few blue tits eating away at the top of the birch tree here. Here is the branch with the buds. They're a little bit more indistinct, but they're alternate along the branch, quite small. And you can see on the branch it's slightly warty, and that's characteristic of birch. We've got downy birch and silver birch. This is silver birch. On a downy birch you have fine hairs along the twig, but on the silver birch you have these warts. And that's very characteristic. Holly, I think we all know that one. And there's a fair bit of holly in the understory. And holly, again, is another great tree for wildlife. And these prickly leaves, if you look at a holly, you notice that there are some leaves that are more rounded than others. And it's obvious that the tree has probably developed the prickles to avoid being eaten by grazers. And they were found actually they've done a lot of research, and this particular piece that I'm referring to there was research on the DNA, and they could see that the tree could change its response depending on whether it was grazed or not. So they were looking at trees, I think it was in Turkey, and then those ones that are more heavily grazed, they produced more prickles. So fairly impressive defense mechanism by the holly. And the fact it's got two shapes of leaves is called heterophyly. Phyly is the leaves, hetero, two shapes. And there are a few other trees that do this as well, but very pronounced in holly. So have a look at it next time you go out. And of course the holly, we all know it's important in food for birds. It's got all the lovely berries before Christmas. So another good source of food for our birds at Eithinog. As you get out of the woods and you walk back up again onto the grassland, there's a lot of gorse. And gorse in Cymraeg is Eithin. So of course the name Eithinog comes from the gorse, and Latin is Europaeus. That's a taller one. There's another one, the western gorse, that grows in usually along our coasts, coastal heathland on Anglesey and so on. And the gorse at Eithinog is the common gorse, Ilex europaeus. It's taller. It flowers now. It will flower maybe from December right through to May. Well, sometimes I think it flowers all year round. But Gallii, the western gorse, that flowers later in the year, traditionally. So the flowers are very sweet scented, and on a hot summer's day, you can hear them pop, and they smell rather like coconut. So here is the gorse. Again, good nectar for the bees. Big gorse bushes, just looking back. When I came out on the grassland, there was another songthrush. I tried hard to get it to face me, but it was just hopping around and hopping away, very busy eating there. So plenty of songthrush, and then also I saw another blue tit up in the trees. So here we're looking up back towards where I come, Eithinog. The Eithinog, I think so, in the middle.
Yeah, heading back from Pechler, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a sort of characteristic shot from Eithinog. And then I came across these ones. Do you know what they are? I would ask you if I could. Anyway, we have a little look. We go a bit closer, because I first saw them. I thought, what are they? Walk a little bit closer. That's still not good enough, I suppose. But the bark is quite fissured. These are old. And here you can see they've got straight shoots, usually in the middle, coming up like that. And then leaves were coming out. This photo was actually taken on my December walk. The leaves were coming out already in December. Goodness knows what happened to them. But this is elder. And Scawen, Sambucus nigra in Latin. It's recognized actually if you smell the twigs, they are slightly unpleasant. And also the leaves don't smell particularly nice. The elder was feared by the devil, so you meant to plant a tree by a house to stop the devil coming in, and very popular with foragers. And I certainly pick the flowers every year to make elderflower cordial. And I find them quite strong, rather nasty, smelly, actually, nasty scent, but they make fantastic cordial. That's quite interesting. The twigs, they have a hollow inside. The buds are, I haven't got a photo, but there, we did have a photo. It's slightly ragged appearance. And the bark is this fissured bark here. So there's fair few elder around Eithinog in the hedges as well. So Kai glebe, that means the wet field. And of course, in the wet field, we have a lot of salix or willow. This is not a very lovely photograph, but here you can see the flowers. And of course, the willow, I hadn't realized when we did a bumblebee walk around Eithinog, that we did in 2019, one every month. I thought the wet field was going to be the worst for bumblebees, but actually in March it was the best, because the bumblebees, the early queens, were very busy feeding here on the flower, plenty of nectar on all our willow. So that was an interesting discovery. Have a look at the top of your willow trees, and you probably find that the early bumblebee queens are already up there feeding away. All around the reserves we have dog rose and different types of wild roses as well. Again, another good food source for birds. What else? Here we're discovering an unusual tree, and this is a white bean, Freda Wyn, and we had to have a look, to ID it properly. I haven't got a good photo of the bud, sorry, but Sorbus aria, and that one really we want to go and look at in spring, but lovely white flowers, and then later on good red berries. So that is only a couple of trees, I think, at Eithinog, which are in one of the hedges. This is just looking down to one of the other entrances, which then leads you out by the Jehovah's Witness Church on Penrose Road. Oh yeah, and that is that entrance. So I'll just quickly tell you what I do at Eithinog. I take groups there. I've had quite a lot of children of all ages, from the primary school right down to the little ones in nursery, and then other stuff. The secondary school occasionally go there. I haven't done so much with them, but we have a bit of fun, we go exploring, and it's a great site for bug hunts. And I usually lay out some kind of wildlife quiz or something for them to wander around the reserve. Yes, looking forward to that. They had so much fun, and there's plenty of butterflies for them to catch. We got fantastic volunteers at Eithinog, and this is Freda, who's giving a little helping hand. Freda is one of our lookers, which means that she goes on daily walks checking that the cattle is all right. So she's a great help on the reserve. We have a lot of other people who do that as well, but Freda's been doing it for a very long time. Here is the killed mayfrin, having a wander. So to come, we can do some other talks, spring, summer, autumn, and of course in the autumn, we usually have a brilliant fungus foray with experts coming in to help me or others. And the only flower I could take here for you, this is a black knapweed or hardhead, and there's plenty of them at Eithinog. It's rather characteristic of the site. And I did mention the bumblebee walk, and here you can see the black one actually. Oh yeah, this photo was end of March when we started the bumblebee walk. And I hope actually to do that again this year. Last year it didn't happen, but I hope to take it up again. And I have been given a little fill. So we have at the moment interns who are working for the trust, the young people, and one of them called Emily Davis, she put out some nighttime cameras at Eithinog. So she's made a little film. So I'm going to share that with you now before I hand over to Matt. Let's see. There we go. So that was a great little film put together by Emily, and she was hoping, I suppose, to see red squirrels on the film, but there weren't any. So those were grey squirrels, and there's some voles and wood mice and various other birds, as you can see. So I'm going to stop talking now, and Matt is taking over. But Matt hasn't had time to put together photographs because he's been out there working today. Well, I've been in the office, but we're going to swap chairs so you can have a chat or listen to Matt now anyway. Okay.
Good afternoon, one and all, and thanks very much for tuning in. And please bear with me, because it's the first time I've done one of these, and rather stupidly, I've not done any notice. But I'll give it a shot. Management of the sites. As Anna's mentioned, the majority of the reserve is actually designated SSSI, and as such, that applies to the meadows there, a series of 5 meadows that they have there. And as such, that's by dint of the fact of their grass and their grass floristically very rich, and indeed, as Anna mentioned too, again, particularly very good for fungi as well. Around the edge, there is woodland. There are hedges between the fields, and there's small sections of woodland around the edges as well. Management, 2 forms. So it's either done by human, or it's done by the cattle, as indeed you'll see from the photos there. And where possible, we like the cattle to be able to do it rather than the man. Taking the meadows first, we want them to be grassland, but we want them grassland with scrubby edges. So here, indeed, in this photo here, you can see them clearing blackthorn, which has been encroaching. Indeed, as Anna mentioned again, it suckers profusely. It's a great species to have in hedges, but given an inch, it will take a mile and it will come out from the hedges and come into the grassland. To a degree, the cattle or other grazers will actually keep it in check. However, it will get away. So what these guys are doing here is indeed cutting or pulling it out by the roots. The stumps are then treated with a derivative of Roundup, trying to keep the blackthorn in check. Similarly done with other species which are seeding into the grassland from the hedgerows, species such as sycamore, that's getting away. The ash, to a lesser degree, that's kept in check because indeed, as was alluded to earlier on, ash dieback is having a massive impact, particularly on seedlings and saplings, so young age ash. So that's yet less of a concern in terms of so-called natural progression going from grassland to what it would like to become is secondary woodland. We would like to keep it as grassland. So conjunction of management by humans and with the grazing by the cattle should keep it in the condition where we want it. So not just as a billiard board grassland, but to have fuzzy edges as well, so scrub around the edges as well. Sorry.
Volunteers.
I volunteered, yes, to do with this, absolutely. As I've been nudged. Volunteers play a vital role throughout the organisation, and not least from my point of view in terms of helping with the management of works on sites such as Eithinog. So indeed here, in fact, one of the members here is indeed, I notice here is from NRW indeed, so we get them out as well. Volunteers, a lot of volunteers for Eithinog are local, but equally we get a lot of help from students at university, which is great, and the dynamics between old and young I think is particularly great. It's typically you will think of the volunteers, or at least I thought of volunteers previously where I was working with Essex Wildlife Trust, you'd have your so-called, in inverted commas, the grey greenies, so the recently retired wanting to get out and do some work. But it's great to be able to have the youngsters work alongside as well, and I think all have a lot to gain from mixing together. Into the woodland, or the hedgerows. The hedgerows were being taken over quite considerably by species such as the sycamore. Now, sycamore is quite a shade tolerant and a shade casting tree. Again, give it an inch, it will take a mile. So what we've done along the hedgerows there is selectively take out the mature sycamore, and again, stump treatment, I don't particularly want them coming back. Elsewhere in the bits of woodland which we've really yet to get into, it's a case of where we were just last Friday, actually, indeed, the side of a ditch line to allow some light into the ditch line. It was a case of clear the litter out of the ditch line, but more importantly, fell the sallow and indeed cracked willow to a depth of about 6 metres along the edge of this ditch on the south side in order to allow light to penetrate to the floor. Material there, how do we get rid of it? We put it into a dead hedge. As was mentioned earlier, and you've seen in the photos there, where possible, material is used, instead of being burnt, it's actually put behind the fences. Often those fences are against the previous stone walls there, put behind the fences as a dead hedge, all pointing uphill, as my volunteers will tell you I'm most particular about. What's it doing? So it's creating a barrier, again, to dissuade cattle from challenging the fences. But more importantly, from a wildlife and a conservation point of view, it's providing a habitat which is rotting down, and therefore providing home for mammals and birds in which to nest and set up. Were we to leave it just strewn in the grassland where it was, or indeed within the woodland where it was cut, then yes, it would rot down, but in the meantime, the brambles and indeed roses, the dog roses, would be scrambling through it and climbing that much higher than they would otherwise have done. And in so doing, they'll be casting more shade to the ground, and the ground floor underneath wouldn't be coming up. So, whilst not being too clinical, as indeed can be levelled at burning everything, that's too clinical on the site. It is nevertheless providing some order where order is required. That said, we do burn. I have had several burns on Eithinog and more typically on other reserves such as Corsgach. It is a very practical means of getting rid of material, and indeed, historically, everything was done through burning. So there's a balance to be had between the purists that would say, thou shalt not burn, everything must be rotted down, and those that would otherwise say it's got to be clinically clean, everything must be chipped. There was a balance to be had, and I like to think that we're somewhere in the middle. Anna, can you prompt anything? Ah, yes, thank you. I know I should have written something down beforehand. Management, go back to grassland. Some of the stuff is done by hand, by human, and indeed we do it with brush cutters, but also, as has been mentioned here, scything. We do scything as well, and there are indeed scything competitions. Just as there are hedge land competitions, there are scything competitions. And they're good fun. They really are good fun. So we have the volunteers out and put them in charge of Austrian scythes and the like. A scary prospect initially, but the volunteers in general really do enjoy it. And they all do their pole dark impressions. What's that?
Do you remember we had an 80-year-old man
Oh,
there?
indeed, yes.
Yeah.
As
All ages.
Yeah, so age is no barrier to using a scythe, using any tool, but using a scythe. There's an 80-year-old gentleman using a scythe the other year that we had out there. Another thing that's been pointed out, cattle, yes, grazing there. In the early years when the trust had the site, I understand that we did actually take, or hay crop was taken off as a means of trying to reduce the fertility of the land. Rather counterintuitively, the poorer the fertility of a site, actually the greater number of grass species, of grass and herb species will it actually support. By taking the grass off in whichever way that be, whether that be through the grazing animals or whether that be through actually physically taking it off site by a hay cut, you are reducing the fertility of the site and improving its ability to support numbers of species. Now we're in a situation where we no longer need to take the hay crop off, and indeed the cattle are there grazing all year round in a rotational basis around the 5 fields. It is extensively grazed as opposed to intensively grazed, so between 4 and 6 head of cattle throughout the year, and indeed at this time of year we're down to 3 or 4, and then through the summer up to 6. So it's just enough to keep it in check. And I'm running out of things to say.
I think that's absolutely perfect. So anyway, thank you very much, Matt, because I rather thought that was a great idea for Matt to come in and have a little chat to you about management. And one thing I do want to mention that's happening at Eithinog and around Eithinog is, together with Plant Life, we are developing a health and well-being trail. Well, we have trails and paths anyway on the reserve, but this is going to be with a leaflet, and it's going to link with the hospital. So they're pointing out a path from the hospital down to the reserve, and this particular leaflet is more concentrating on the health and well-being aspects of being outside. So that is all to come, and I think the launch will be sometime in May. So do look out for that. I'm sure we'll advertise it on the website again, and there will be a nice link. I think with all the GP surgeries will have these leaflets encouraging people to go for a walk, enjoy the wildlife, and connect with nature as part of the healing process, whether it's for mental health or other ailments. So that's to come. And now I think we can open up for questions. So actually, yeah, I think we can, I suppose, stop recording